Thank you, Andrea. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. I've hopped on a couple of your calls before and always find this group to be very inspirational, and I learn something every single time. So I hope that I can give others some food for thought and take with you after tonight. But my name is Christa Thomas. I am the founder of A Playful Childhood Now, which is a consulting and training um, business. I just recently closed my own farm and forest nature school after 7 years, which was heartbreaking, but it is what led me to meeting Camden and Andrea and so many other wonderful educators out there. And it was such a gift. But I've been doing this, been in the world of early childhood and learning from children for more than 20 years and continue to learn from them still to this day. So what I want to start with, though, I want to be respectful because I'm kind of a storyteller, so I'll try not to go off of tangents. But I do want to start tonight with a story, and I'm going to share my screen for just a moment to show you an image, if that's okay. Can y'all see my little picture here? You see it? Okay. So this is Leo, and he's my little buddy. At this point, when I met Leo, he was 4. Now he is 6, and I think he's a pretty fantastic human being. And this is at my nature school. But Leo wasn't always this confident and sure of himself. There's a story behind him, but I was wondering if you guys can unmute for this. I would love to hear what your thoughts are. Just looking at this picture, are there any assumptions that you might want to make about Leo and his personality or who he is? Anybody have any thoughts?
Well,
I
this
see
is Sarah.
exploration.
Oh, go ahead. I was going to say, this is Sarah, and I see a child after my own heart. We love mud puddles. So I'm up here in Portland, Oregon, and we live for love. We live for mud puddles.
Same.
I second that. He looks very blissful.
I see exploration. It looks like he started with perhaps taking his car in, and that the car got him started and he got closer, and then perhaps spread to, getting out on his boots and then on his legs. And then from there, it was a slow emergence, I would think. That's sort of how I would read it.
Yeah, beautiful. Anybody else? So yes, blissful. I love who said that. Sarah, was that you? Or Jen, did you say that? Blissful. Yes, and this is kind of Leo's kind of the perfect definition of. I'm going to take this off for just a second now that we've looked at it, but he's kind of the definition to me when I think of my view of children, and he wasn't always this happy and blissful, for sure. When he came to my program, he had been in a more traditional setting for only 2 short months, but it was not fun for him at all. He every day would get dropped off, and he would spend the majority of his days crying or hiding from everybody. He didn't want to engage, didn't want to talk to anybody. He was often bribed and tried to coax to stop crying. His teachers often just kind of like let him be and just ignored where he was emotionally. They started complaining to his parents about, lack of social skills, lack of language. They started kind of nitpicking little things, and he had only been there for just a few short weeks. And you can imagine that it starts to impact him as a child and how he feels in that space. And then it was only when mom noticed that he was literally making himself physically sick on the way to school every morning, and he was crying, that she maybe didn't need to have him in this environment. And we look at that image of Leo, all of us who maybe have a different view than his teachers did, and we see somebody who is sure of himself, exploring, willing to explore, willing to take risks and get in there and have a good time. And I just wonder if Leo had ever stayed in that environment, if those teachers ever would have allowed him to get to that space, to take those risks, to be who he was, to explore his environment, to step outside of the expectations, right? So when he arrived to my program, he kind of brought his own personal lived experiences. Those 2 short months, he brought them to our space. And he was, again, quiet, shy, hung out on the periphery, didn't want to engage, watched children. He sat and observed a lot. And I knew that I needed to use every tool that I had to reach Leo and provide a positive learning and play environment for him. And it took some time to get to the point that you saw in that picture. But the way that we did it, myself, my co-teacher, we walked through some of these steps that I'm going to share with you today. And I think it's important for us to realize, just as Leo brought his lived experience into his play and into his new learning environment, we do too, as educators, not to get too deep, but our lived experiences are deeply rooted in who we are, and they absolutely are going to show up in our learning spaces and when we're working with kids. So if some of our past experiences are that, we are absolute rule followers, then maybe when we get into our teaching environments, we are sticklers for rules. We just have to be mindful of who are those rules for and why do we have them, right? And it's obvious, as Leo's mom shared with me tidbits from the teachers, that their view was very deeply rooted in who they were too. I could tell or make some assumptions about them that maybe they were coming from a place of control or conformity, and they felt frustrated when Leo didn't fit what they saw a 4-year-old should look like in their classroom. Maybe they tried all their tricks of the trade and they didn't work, like the bribery and the toys and things like that. Maybe they were focused too much on all the things he was doing wrong or the things he couldn't do, and they just couldn't get past that. And I don't know where that comes from for those teachers, but we might have some of that in us where we focus on negative a lot, and it's really hard to get past that. And again, the need for rules, like I said, if we're sticklers for rules, sometimes we stick to them too much, and we forget about our rules and how they impact the children that are in our space. So the remainder of our year was spent trying to undo everything that had been done. And it was not easy, but we eventually got to a point where Leo, who is a huge sensory seeker, found every mud puddle there was all year long. It was really great. And even if there was no mud puddles to be found, he was often dumping water out and just laying on wet ground. He loved the cold, wet ground. And then eventually he learned how to insert himself into play and started participating in our gathering circles, and jumped out of his car and greeted us with a smile and open arms every day. So it just felt really good to watch that transformation. And I know it was absolutely because he was with new adults who saw him for who he was and focused on Leo as a whole child and not just his deficiencies. So since I've transitioned into this consulting and working with other adults, I am starting to see this, sadly, far too often in these new environments that I'm going into. And I'm really happy that these people are asking me to come in and work with them. But what I'm seeing is a little glimpse into my old teaching self, like my young teaching self, when I see these new teachers out there and wanting everybody to come sit for circle time, and they're doing their typical traditional things that are very cognitively oriented and standards based. And so I'm happy that they have me there, but what I've come to realize is that no matter how much I talk with them about philosophy and implementation, it's going to fall on deaf ears until they can start to work on themselves and who they are in the classroom as educators. And so I'm kind of stepping back and asking you guys to kind of go through this process with me tonight of what I've been going through with some of these new educators. I usually start with a little bit of self-reflection. I'm a deeply reflective person, and I feel like if you work with young kids, you have to be reflective in your education practice. So I always start with a reflection, and I'd like to do that with y'all right now as well. I'd like for you to think back. If you want, you can go all the way back to childhood, but we don't have to go too deep. I want you to think about some positive or negative experience that maybe you had in play or in learning. Maybe it was your young adult years or in college. Maybe it was an experience as a new parent that might have shifted the way you view children. Or maybe it was just 10 years into your teaching practice, right? Like, I want you to try to think about an experience that's been kind of transformational or pivotal for you, where you've seen a little glimpse of your past in your teaching practice. I'll give you just a second to kind of think on it, and then I'll share my big transformation. Well, before I share mine, actually, if anybody has one that just came to you super quick, does anybody want to raise your hand and tell me what memory you might have? Not yet? Okay. I'll go ahead and share you my big transformational moment. When I first started teaching, I was lucky enough to be gifted the experience of learning from educators over in Reggio Emilia, Italy. Um, I had been working in low income childcare centers prior to that, from 14 all the way through college. And so my perspective on teaching was very different. Or maybe not. Maybe it was exactly the way everybody else's is in the States. And it wasn't until I got to go to Reggio Emilia, Italy, that I changed it changed the trajectory of my teaching career. Um, the biggest takeaway for me was that the entire community, not just the educators and the caregivers, but the entire community held children in such high regard. They had such deep value and respect for children. And it was obvious everywhere you went in the community. It was obvious in the design of the schools. It was obvious in the implementation and practices with the children. And recently, as I just started working with these other schools, I had pulled out my old journal, which is why I love journaling, because I get to go in a deep dive back into my old 21-year-old brain. And I wrote that over and over the 10 days. Just, I cannot believe how they view children. And how am I going to go back to the States and do this and honor this, right? And so that's why it's been on my heart a lot lately. And so that was gifted to me before I even entered and stepped foot into like a real class out of college. And I don't think I've ever really looked back ever since. I've just continued to grow from that. So image of the child and view of children is extremely important to them. And I think that that's my mission going forward now, is to give people these key components that they can work through and reflect on. And I want to do that with y'all. But before I do, does anybody have, I shared my transformational moment with you. Does anybody have a memory? Yeah, Felicity. You'll have to unmute.
Yeah, well, throughout my 20s, I taught in a variety of capacities, but mostly teaching adults, and then English as a second language, which made me realize I didn't know anything about teaching at all. So I went back and got a graduate degree in secondary education, actually. But I never really spent time with young children. And I wasn't really interested in young children, except in a sort of theoretical way. But I was almost 30 and I had newly come to the United States, and I got a sort of a by the bootstraps job babysitting for this 2.5-year-old boy who was much loved and had this whole network of people who cared for him and looked after him while his mother was doing some academic research in Nepal for 6 months, and his dad was an ER doctor. So, you know, they were well healed, and there were lots of people involved in this young man's life. And he didn't like me. You know, I was like the new girl on the block, and a stranger, and he put me through some paces. And I remember so clearly one day thinking, I don't know what I'm doing here. This kid doesn't like me, but we're going for a walk. And we sat down I was in Seattle at the time, and we sat down by Green Lake, and I just shut up and watched what he was doing. And, you know, and I knew this from older kids too, but I hadn't actually seen the magic work with a little one. And I waited, and he was chucking things in the water and, you know, trying to get the ducks to come and eat grass and stuff like that. And after a little while, I sort of tentatively joined in the play, and it was like butter. It was like, oh, all of a sudden we're together and we're doing what he wants to do. And it was just such a simple interaction, letting him lead the play, you know, and it stuck with me. And it was a really informative and transformative moment when I actually had kids of my own too, you know, get out of the way. And it was good.
Yes, absolutely. I love that. Does anybody else have a big moment that they remember?
I love how she said that though. Just get out of your own way.
Get out of your
That's
own way. Get out of the
so
way.
true. I think adults have a hard time. We get in our own way and we analyze things too much and like, am I doing this right? Am I getting the information I need from the just shut it off and just relax and just go with the flow. I love it. I love it.
Right.
Which is a lot
My
harder if
moment-
you're in a classroom of 30 or 20, you know.
Yeah, that's true. I think my moment would be a few years ago. I was working with nonverbal children that needed extra supports. And there was multiple moments. I don't know how to define just the one, but it would be whenever you have adults that just say that child's nonverbal, they don't need the extra supports and stuff. And it's like, watch me, you know, and it's like, watch this child play, you know, that there's still ways to communicate and watch this, you know, and there's ways to still play and have fun and engage with the children just because it doesn't look the typical way. And Christa, you were trying to made me think of that when you were talking about it. It doesn't always look the way you think it's going to look. And I was like, wow, that reminds me of that. It doesn't always look the way it looks. It looks how they need it to look. And that reminded me of that. And that was my pivotal moment. Like, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
This is it. I want to support children and whatever they need it to look like, you know, and that's what's important.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And children have so many other languages besides just verbal spoken language and ways to represent their understanding, their emotions, their learning. And again, this goes back to the way we view children, right? So if there are adults in the space that think, why waste our time on too many supports when they really aren't speaking? How else are they showing us what they know, or how else are they trying to connect with us? There's so much more. So I love that you were able to see that and recognize other people not necessarily stepping up, but you were willing to do it. And as Felicity mentioned, get out of our own way. That might be like a little bit of the perfectionist in us, or maybe if we view the fact that us as adults know more than children, then we always are in the way because we want to tell them everything we know and we want to show them all the things that we know how to do. But it's really once we recognize that, like she did, where she was just like, I just shut up and watched. Well, when we do that and we get out of their way, we can actually see them shine and see what they are capable of. So thank you all for sharing those stories. Shannon, you were going to jump in. Maybe we can save it for at the end. When we get to like the Q&A, because I want to keep moving forward. But these are beautiful examples of exactly what I am going to go into. One of the things there's 6 different components or key elements to kind of shifting our adult mindset and view of children that I've been working through with other early childhood professionals. And so I'm going to just go through the 6 and briefly describe them, give you a moment to kind of think about your thoughts on them, and then we'll kind of wrap it up after that. But the first component is recognition of competence. I think that it's so important for us to view children as capable and competent human beings. Children are not a subset of human beings. They are actual human beings, and we have to see them as that and realize that they are born capable and competent. And as long as they have the right environment that is supportive and caring, they will thrive. They prove that to us in infancy as they start to move through milestones all on their own without us doing crawling practice and walking practice. And, we just are there to support them when they need it, and then encourage them and clap when they do great. And so we know that they're born with that. And I don't know why at about 3 to 4, we quit thinking that they're all of a sudden capable of their own play and learning, and we start thinking that we have to provide that for them. So I think that it's important for us to do that. And when we can acknowledge that, we can see their like innate potential and give them a little bit of agency over their play and learning. Number 2 is value their voices. And I guess, as Jen said, maybe, or not their voices, maybe it's value their voices in all ways of communicating. Children's opinions and thoughts and ideas should be taken seriously. No matter how old they are, they should be taken seriously. I think that as a society, we've moved away from that old children should be seen and not heard mentality. At least we've gotten past that point. But there is a sense of that in a traditional education setting. If you go into these more like compulsory ed and public school settings, there is a little less of valuing children's voices and opinions, and I find that to be very sad. I think it definitely stifles their curiosity, and when we don't recognize what they're saying and showing us, it can provide, or not provide, it can kind of almost give off this sense of judgment, and then they don't want to express their opinions, right? So I think that when we can allow them to express that, we are influencing their engagement in our lessons or in our experiences and in our play. And the third one that I want to mention is encouraging independence. This goes along with that valuing their voice too. But I think that we need to respect children and allow them the opportunity to make choices about their play and their learning. And when we do that, we can promote this like self-directed self-awareness in them. They need to be allowed to make decisions about how they spend their time, what they spend their time doing, and even who they spend their time with. I think once they start to become a little more independent in our spaces, They feel more confident in taking reasonable and healthy risks. I saw that absolutely in my nature program, and anybody who works in an outdoor setting has probably seen this in that physical development component where they start to climb a little higher, or they start to take off their shoes to experience balancing. And those risks help build confidence in who they are. So building an awareness of themselves, building confidence. And I think when we can offer this independence, it also changes how they see their responsibility and their roles in our classroom culture. A perfect example of that, if I can give a shout out to Camden and Andrea, when I was visiting your program just recently, we all shared a meal together. The children made this beautiful meal, and we sat down and we enjoyed it and we had conversation. But when the meal was over, the children got up and dispersed and went straight into filling wash tubs, washing dishes, drying dishes, sweeping the floor, wiping down the table. It was such a beautiful, it gives me chills thinking about that moment. I know that it's a part of your ritual and your routine, so it's every day for you too. But it was so refreshing to see, after I've been in some other environments, this is definitely not happening. But those children had a sense of responsibility in your program and in that space, and they wanted to do those chores, and that it was just built into their day. And there's so many times where adults find this power struggle with, like, the kids won't clean up, or the kids won't participate, or every time I ask a question, nobody raises their hand, but why would they want to participate? Why would they want to clean up? Why would they take ownership of the space if we've never even given them a sense of responsibility? So I think that's really important for us to kind of think about. And it so naturally it's obvious that it's been naturally kind of implemented into your program just as a part of your routine. And I love that. So I had to share that, you guys. Their program is absolutely precious. Okay. And you didn't get to that point without building relationships. So that's number 4, building relationships. Felicity mentioned earlier that she had a hard time connecting. She was the new girl on the block, and this kid that she was in charge of just didn't really like her. And she had to find a way to get past that, right? And to build a relationship with him so that they could learn and play together. And I think that relationships are key to just human existence, and we really can't get anywhere else without having that. And it was obvious in Leo's story as well that there was no solid relationship between him and the adults that were in that previous experience. I don't know if y'all have ever heard of Lisa Murphy, but she is a big play advocate. She does a lot of talk about unrestricted play and messy play. And I heard her say in one of her talks that it's very difficult to give value to something that you've never had a deep connection with. And it stuck with me. I really love that. I guess that could be like an inanimate object. It could be like money. It could be people, whatever. But I took it as people and relationships. How can we assign value to children and see them as valuable to our classroom culture if we don't connect with them? We just can't. So I think that was huge for me. That will always stick with me. And speaking of connection, number 5 is fostering emotional intelligence. I think social emotional learning today gets misinterpreted in a lot of classroom environments, but it's just about allowing them ways to express and use their voice, express their emotions, support their language development. I often hear teachers say that children don't know how to get along. They don't know how to share. They don't know how to share a space with others. I think about that. I speak a lot towards early childhood because that's my realm, but even up to, I think about the emotional state of maybe like our preteens, middle schoolers, and high schoolers. and how adults say they don't know how to work out problems. And I think that emotional intelligence comes from being able to navigate social situations. You have to be in a social situation in order to know how to navigate through it. And in today's society, so often kids get into a little spit spat with peers and adults jump right in and they grab that toy and say, you need to share, or you need to make space for, and we just tell them what to do. We tell them how to avoid that conflict. But when we can step back, value their voices, offer them chances to speak and share their emotions, they can become advocates for themselves. They learn to set boundaries for themselves and see and respect other people's boundaries. So I think that that's really important for us to kind of make sure that we are finding ways for us to always be encouraging and supporting emotional intelligence, without always stepping in and doing it for them. And then lastly, to tie it all up, all of these that we just mentioned come full circle when we start talking about creating a safe space. And obviously, back to Leo, that's what he needed, was a safe space. And if you are seeing children as capable and competent, and if you are building positive relationships, and if you are listening to them and seeing them for who they are, you're allowing them to take risks, then you are naturally creating and changing the landscape of learning for children. You're creating these safe spaces for them to learn and play. So yeah, these are the 6 components to kind of shifting our mindset that I've been working through with others. And if y'all don't mind, I know we hit the 8 o'clock. We did a little bit of sharing there, but we're at 8 o'clock now. So I want to just show you one more image. It's another one that you might find cute and funny. All right. So without being too philosophical, quoting Gandhi, but we need to kind of be the change that we want to see. And I think that it's important, as we all continue to move forward in working with children, that we advocate and be the voices for children when we're out there talking with other adults, and we lead by example. And I want to show you this little picture of Adriana. She came to me, this reminds me of Jen's story, but she came to me in my program and she spoke no English at all. And I was terrified at how I would provide for Adriana. She spoke German and Spanish fluently. And I thought, how in the world is she going to get anything from being out here? All these kids running around and playing, and they all know each other already. And what will she actually get from our program? And so it was on a trial basis that she started. And just as children do, she proved me completely wrong. I know nothing. And I didn't need to be prepared for her because she had everything she needed to come into that space. She is a lover of all things. Obviously, she loved all the dress up things. She loved to carry everything. She was constantly carrying around a basket or a bucket. That red cone was always filled with things. And I think it was her ticket into play, right? So she didn't have the language in the beginning. So she wanted all the things that made people laugh. And then she brought all these things into play spaces and would offer them. Do you need this truck? She would just kind of offer it, right? Didn't need the language in the beginning. But she thrived. And less than 6 months into our program, she was speaking fluent English, which blew my mind. It never impeded in the play. The children saw her for who she was. And I just needed to sit back and watch and learn from the kids. As I said, we're always learning from them. And so, yeah, with that also, sorry, I have all these things I want to share with you guys. One last thing too. Have any of y'all ever seen the, let me take this off so I can see everybody's faces. Oh no, it won't let me take it off. There it is. Okay. Have any of you ever seen the TED Talk with Sir Ken Robinson, where he talks about how creativity is stifled in our education system? Have y'all seen that? Okay. So I know it's old and maybe you saw it a really long time ago, but man, there's this funny part in one part of his speech where he talks about academia, in particular professors, and how they live in their heads. And he talks about professors being these like heads that walk around and their bodies are just like there to transport, right? And they just live in this world of like cognitive space. And the image he creates was actually really funny to me. And I think that is like a direct like translates directly to our education system, how we just live in the cognitive and in the head, and we forget that there's an entire body connected to heads, and it's not just meant to be a transportation device. And so while we know that we might be educating future professors and we need to give them all this knowledge, we also might be educating future dancers or painters or firefighters or doctors or lawyers. And we have to remember that there's a whole child connected to that head. And if we only focus on the cognitive, they're never going to reach their full potential, at least while they're in our care. So I'll end on that note. Don't forget about the whole child. Yeah, so there's my thoughts. Does anybody have any thoughts, questions? Shannon, if you want to share a memory, please chime in.
I'm all right, but thank you. Thank you for sharing with us tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really liked how you wrapped around to the safety as the 6 point or a safe place. That really just seemed to be like such a capstone of what's so vital. And certainly for me, that is definitely the center of really what's important in all things teaching are getting to that place where the students feel safe every day. Safe in their play, safe to explore, take risks, do learning, but that safety is there is so important to me. So I appreciated that.
I wanted to just go back to your beginning of the story where you visited Reggio Emilia place and how you were so impressed by how adults and others really see children and treat them so so honoring who they are. And I wonder if you could share a little bit more about that and how it's kind of mind-boggling how we don't do that here in the US as much as we need to, we should. And children's image of children in this society is probably very different and very far from what you have seen. Have you seen? Yeah, so I'll let you.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I will start with, so a little bit of history if you're not familiar with Reggio Emilia, Italy, but there are world-renowned preschools and philosophies and approaches with working with children started after World War II, and when things were just in chaos, right? And there was this need for a safe space for children to be. And the adults that created these learning environments went into it with that in mind. We need to give them a safe space to be and to play and just be children. And that right there is already different than where our school system and our views of working with young children came from, right? So I don't think we came to it as a, let's provide a safe space for children to play. I don't think that's where ours came from, right? And so that's where it all started. But it's obvious throughout the community. I can remember we did a tour of like the local theater, and this big, huge, beautiful, dark blue velvet curtain in the theater had this gorgeous design on the front of it. It was designed by children that were 4 and 5 years old in one of the local preschools. And that was hanging in this old historic theater. could you imagine being a 5-year-old child going to see a show at that theater and seeing something that you collaborated with your friends on is now presented to the entire city? And so while it is a tiny city, it's very small. It's just a different way of thinking, and it's a whole different perspective. In the schools, the spaces are actually designed with the children in mind. So there's large open spaces for exploration and play. They provide beautiful things that look familiar to children for them to play with and engage with. They take them out into the city to learn the history and the culture of the city, which is a huge part of their programming. And they take their work out into the city and do presentations and these beautiful displays to show off their work. And this is all, we're talking about like 3s and 4s and 5-year-olds, right? Not high schoolers. They start at a very young age, and seeing them as these capable people who have beautiful ideas and have voices. And the ways that I saw that within the spaces was the way that the adults were constantly documenting their words. They did a lot of jotting down the things that the children were saying, and sharing that in these, documentation displays, so that others who came into the spaces could see it, but also more importantly, that the children can see it. So when the children saw their artwork with their words attached, that kind of translates to, my words have value, and this teacher sees it as valuable, and they recognize what I'm learning here. And I think there are ways that we do that now in some of our learning spaces, but maybe not as much. But it was just, I don't know how to put it into words. Experiencing Reggio, and maybe some of you have had that, if you've ever worked overseas anywhere else, but to me, experiencing it is just almost hard to put into words. It was completely different. When I came back and went right back into the Title I child care center that I had been working at for years prior to, it was scary to go back in and listen to how the adults were talking to the children. And it hurt so bad to be in that space. And I was still so young. And I thought, how in the world can I say something to these people to stop what they're doing? But over time, and that's part of our education journey ourselves, right? Like, we're constantly evolving and learning and growing. And I think that when we become complacent, or when we think we figured it all out, that's when we're the teachers that we mentioned before. That's when we just get stuck in telling children what to do and when to do it. And so I think that continuing to grow and evolve. So I had to bring that back with me and try it out and practice it and see how it worked for me in my spaces that I was working. I hope that helps you a little bit.
Yeah, Christa, when you said about the experience of being in the space and seeing it firsthand, it's hard to describe. And when you had us reflect on those learning experiences for ourselves of what's now impacted us in the way that we work with children, I think 90% of the things that came into my mind were opportunities where I was in the presence of another teacher, another environment where children were getting these types of experiences. And I mean, there's several people in this call right now who I had the honor of being in their presence around children or in their spaces and learn from directly. And I can feel how those moments stay with me and affected the way that I now work with children. Whether it was going back to finishing college and being in Denmark and watching an early childhood educator in Copenhagen tell me, no, don't interfere. They can figure out how to untangle their bikes by themselves. I said, are you sure? Said, yeah. And she was so calm and stood back, and like to this day, like that moment stays with me. I've been in Rebecca's classroom. I've seen Paula's face. I've seen Zareen teach, and Gift, I think, is also in this call. Some incredible educators that there's something about being in it and seeing that, and you as well, Christa, seeing your space. That sometimes it's just, oh, there is another way, like, and seeing that someone else is actually doing it. I think, like you said, when you're young and there's only one experience that you've had, maybe in your own personal education experience, and then you go to a particular type of training program, and then there's only one way of doing it that way. But the opportunity to see and be in these spaces, I think, it's my wish for all educators and anyone working with children is to have those experiences.
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, because you can read about it, you can watch all the videos, you can listen to all the podcasts you want, but when you get to see it in action, it has such a different impact. It's I get kind of emotional about it because it was so deep, this reaction that I had to watching them with children. It was just like, holy cow, what have I been doing what have I been thinking all this time, And so, yes, Andrea, when you can witness it firsthand, it does have a little bit more of an impact on you. So I encourage anybody who's never been able to shadow someone else that's taking this approach with children to go and do it and sit and watch and observe, because it is powerful. And then one of the other things I thought about really quickly while you were talking, Andrew, when you said they can untangle their bikes by themselves. So there's this misinterpretation sometimes that I've actually seen as well, where people take what they've read because they haven't seen it or witnessed it in person. So they take what they have read and they misinterpret it in the way that they present it. So the example that came to mind for me was there was a program that I witnessed, and the teacher was really big on like fostering this independence. She was super hardcore about it, but to the point of forgetting like humanity and general kindness, right? And that goes back to this caring and supportive and safe environment. So a child was walking with all these things in their hand and they dropped a glove, and I went to go, just, do you need some help? And go pick up this glove. And she was like, no, they can get it. And I thought, well, okay, like I know she's trying to teach them to keep up with their material, do all their things and be independent, but to me that was just general kindness. Like, I see you and I recognize that you need help. And so again, that goes back to seeing it in action versus reading it in a book, right? And if you were watching her and the way that she modeled to you, let these kids figure this out. And I guarantee if they were still struggling with those bikes and they were super tangled and they couldn't get them, she probably would have stepped in, right? But yeah, so I think we have to kind of keep those things in mind again when we take things to the extreme. Unfortunately, we kind of do that sometimes in education. We read about something and then we just hardcore go for it, and we don't think about that children are like living, breathing, changing things right in front of us, and we have to adjust based on who's in front of us every day. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, Andrea.
Thank you for being here, Christa. I'm Rebecca.
Hi, Rebecca.
When you were talking, I was thinking, because you were referring to thinking. And so it came up to me as how we think about children's thinking. And do we really, in that moment, are we thinking about children's thinking rather than thinking about where we feel they need to be in that moment with their thoughts? Mm-hmm. So now we come to freedom of thought. Do children have freedom of thought in the programs that we live in? And that is a human right. Also, how do we think about curriculum? Is curriculum a goal or is it a tool? Is it a tool that we can use to bring forth human potential? So how do we view curriculum? Is it there as just the goal? And so now we're ushering all these kids along, or is it the tool combined with how we're thinking about children's thinking and how curriculum now can evolve moment for moment? It doesn't mean that we don't come in with a plan, but how does that plan then evolve once everybody gets there? And then in 5 minutes from now, we may have to adjust because a great discovery has just been made. And that is bringing forth human potential, thinking, freedom of thought, freedom of expression. And so when you were reflecting on how Reggio does their displays with the children's words, that's also orality, the gift of orality. Oral language and oral storytelling came long before the printed word. And we are so bent on getting children to write without them even being able to draw their own thoughts, to be able to bring that creativity, because that is a language. With Reggio, they speak of the 100 languages of children, but you have to notice the child to see their various languages, and that can happen moment for moment. They might build something, that's a language. They might draw something, that's a language. They may squeal with delight, and that's a language. But how are we thinking about that? Here in the States, we have standardization as if they're automobiles, as if children are just automobiles, and we have to standardize it. And so what's happened with us, generally, not all of us, because we're still all of us that are sitting here fighting against a lot of this, but what happens is now the teacher's thinking is contained to think only certain thoughts and only in a certain way. And so when you've got a teacher that all of a sudden sees something done differently and their heart is like, oh my gosh. For me, there was almost a grieving process because I had spent so long doing things in a particular way. You know, all of a sudden somebody opened a window and said, look out here. And I went, oh my gosh, where has that been? And so I actually found myself going into grief because of what could have been and what wasn't. And now I had to now step onto a different path. And I call it my hidey hole because I went away. I went into a different program. I stepped away from this other stuff for a few years while I developed and created a path and found mentors who are also on that same path. So, thank you. We have to ask questions. When we are not confronted, but when we see strategies and procedures that are not what we're owning at this time, we can pose gentle questions to those, because I firmly believe that they're seeking too. This is what they know. I don't believe that they go home at the end of the day happy with the fact that they bit at a child's creativity. Otherwise they really need to go do something else. But I don't believe in their humanity. I think somewhere they had to put it on a shelf in order to continue doing what they're doing in that time. And there are programs that for me are guilty of continuing this enabling and are continuing these processes that they know are unhealthy, but they don't know how to shift the ship around. And so here we come, hopefully gently, and saying, hey, guess what? We can be developmentally appropriate and we can be kind. And we actually need to get back to the very basics of our early years existence with young children. I'm going to shut up now.
I love it. Thank you so much, Rebecca. I can tell that you are such a reflective human. So thank you for all your beautiful thoughts. And I I had a thought while you were talking about, you were asking about curriculum, and you also mentioned that you don't believe that educators are doing these things on purpose, even if they, developmentally inappropriate things, they're not doing it on purpose. And you're right. And that's why the ones that I'm working with currently, when I go into these spaces, well, one, they asked me to be there. So they've done a little bit of reflecting, and they notice that there needs to be something different. That's a start. But they do like to bring it back to the curriculum and how do I implement my curriculum? And I always tell them we have to stop. We have to push pause. Like, we can't focus on the curriculum until you focus on you. And just like you said, Rebecca, like, it comes back to you having that aha moment of, why am I doing something the way I've been doing it? And now there's a different way. When you can see that for yourself and see why you're bringing certain things, why, I always say, why are you doing it? Who are you doing it for? If the answer is not the children, then what's the point, right? So why are you doing it? Who are you doing it for? And so once we can get back to that, and we can get them to understand that there's their way of thinking impacts the children's way of thinking, and vice versa, right? Then, and we can reflect on our own personal experiences, and we can start to make these shifts in our mindset. Then we can circle it back to curriculum, and we can talk about it. And I think curriculum is just the tool, and it should not be followed to the T. It is definitely not the end goal for me. But yeah, and that's kind of where I'm at right now, is let's start with these things. And what I've been doing is a lot more in depth than what I did with you all tonight. We go into these a little bit deeper. And it's been helpful so far. And I hope that I can continue to do this with a lot of other educators who are out there that are struggling with the learning environment that they're currently in, and they know there's a better way, and then they know they want to do something different. So yeah, thank you, Rebecca. That was really sweet, everything you shared.
I just want to say thank you to everyone who participated today. I've enjoyed, this is my first time calling in instead of being on Zoom, and it was just nice to hear the weaving of so much wisdom together, where you everyone kind of heard what Christa said, and then we're looking at it from different places and angles, and gentle questions, Rebecca. I'm taking that away with me. I love that. Gentle questions. Thank you. And thank you very much to Christa also. And for everyone who's new to the group who came today.
It was great to see everybody participating and hearing everybody's voice. Yeah, thank y'all.
Thank you, Young-hee, for inviting so many friends tonight. What a beautiful gathering of Thailand and Oregon, and maybe some other places as well. I'm not sure. Is there anyone else calling from like any other place other than Thailand or Oregon or Georgia? Just out of curiosity.
California.
I'm from Oregon. Or sorry, my name's Sarah. I'm from Oregon.
Oregon.
Yeah.
And I heard California too. Oh, so wonderful. Chris, I'm so happy you're in Georgia with us. It's amazing to have a group of humans who support early childhood education and the well-being of children in the way that this group does. I feel so refreshed, so enlivened, and just reminded of how important what we're doing is. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you for having us, Andrea.